Good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Cummings. I'm the director here at the PA Curling Bucks County, and I want to welcome everybody to today's Wed Talk, preparing for our new future of workforce for our Wed Talk today. And now I want to introduce Billy Barnes, the Executive Director of the Workforce and Economic Development Board for Bucks County, to introduce our Anita Waters, who is our Business Service Supervisor as well. Billy?
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. I'm Billy Barnes, Executive Director of Workforce and Economic Development for the County of Bucks. Welcome to our 5th Wed Talk for Bucks County employers. Since my department launched this popular webinar series in June, more than 200 professionals have joined us to discuss trending topics with workforce and economic development experts. We've explored the impact of trauma on employee retention, building effective teams through diversity and inclusion, and the benefits of hiring reentrants to meet workforce needs. More Wed Talks are planned throughout the year to help spark new ideas and innovative strategies at your workplace. Before we get started, I'd like to mention another helpful resource that WED offers. WED publishes a monthly e-newsletter to inform our local business community of the latest news, upcoming events, and labor market trends. If you haven't joined our mailing list, go to buckscounty.gov, select Workforce and Economic Development from the Government tab, and click on WED Newsletter from the menu of options. That's where you'll find a link to join the mailing list. It's a great way to stay connected with WED and receive the most relevant workforce and economic development information specific to Bucks County. Now, I would like to turn things over to my colleague, Anita Waters, PA CareerLink Bucks County Business Services Supervisor. Good morning, Anita.
Hi, good morning, Billy. Thank you so much. Today's speaker is Dr. Chris Laney. Dr. Laney is a senior workforce strategist at MC. Chris specializes in workforce and economic development, strategic workforce planning, comprehensive planning, and data analysis. Chris works on projects related to industry sector strategies, labor market demand, and workforce availability for workforce development boards throughout the U.S. Chris comes to MC from CareerSource Suncoast in Florida, where he worked with partners on legislative priorities and talent pipeline strategies, including the development of the nation's largest student exploration conference for high school students. This event led to the annual research project, a State of Students report looking at high school students' perception on college and careers. Chris's research and dissertation focused on WIOA's influence on economic mobility among disenfranchised young adults. And now I present to you Dr. Chris Laney.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for the opportunity to spend some time with you this morning. I'm looking forward to sharing with you what we believe is data that's pointing to a really important conversation happening among a variety of organizations and businesses across the country. Just a few months ago, we produced a study called the Demographic Drought, where we really wanted to understand where the people are at in reference to working. And as we go through today's data, I do want to introduce to you a term that we came up with called the Sandstomic. You can see it there on my screen. Sans meaning without, and demic, as we are all aware of, means people. How do we live in an economy without people? And today's data is going to share with you not only what is happening in our economy today, but also potentially some strategies of how we can address the without people part. I do recognize that depending on where you're at in the world of work, the economic disparity among workers and businesses it has been a hot topic over the last couple of years. And certainly today's goal at MZ Burning Glass is to share with you data. You know, at the crux of what we do, we're a data company. And yes, we might offer some recommendations, some solutions that is data driven, but we hope that today sparks conversation and also gives you some ideas on how you can approach the future of work within your organizations. So what's on the agenda today? Let's see. So we're going to talk a little bit about what was happening pre-COVID. I know we're so focused on the current state of the workforce challenges we're facing today, but I want to remind our employers that are here that 18 months ago, we also struggled to find talent. And so what happened during COVID is only an exacerbation of what was already occurring in the labor market. And so certainly we're going to discuss that today. We're going to discuss a little bit about the future of what we're seeing and where the data is pointing when it comes to people and work. And then lastly, some potential strategies, at least for you to consider as you are building out strategies within your organizations when it comes to finding great employees. So let's jump into the data. Again, starting with what was occurring pre-COVID, what trends were we looking at before everything that we see today? I want to start with the boomer generation, baby boomer generation. For those of you not familiar with the demographics of the generational demographics, the baby boomers born between 1946 and 64 really shaped our workforce world in many different ways, very positive ways. One, it was a massive population, hence baby boom. Highly educated individuals. This was really the start of the conversation about everybody goes to college to some degree. We can discuss that at another time, but that was really the premise of this generation. Hardworking, financially motivated and money focused, and just upskilling driven people, individuals that will continuously learn. You think about all the things that's occurred over the last 40 years and this generation having to adapt in the workforce through every change. And so what this means is, one, what you're seeing in the graphs is the labor force participation rate among women, which really was the driving factor to the labor force increase. And you can see how it increased in just 40 years, nearly double. And so that is both important to understand how that occurred, but also what it means today as we look into some of the data later on in the presentation. Not only did boomers go to college themselves, but they encouraged their children to do the same. College enrollment jumping by 100% just in 10 years between 1965 and 1975, specifically among women. And again, this is going to traditional four-year colleges. And so we are still seeing that play out a little bit in the labor market. However, the last year has definitely upended some of college enrollment, which I will show you later on. We often talk about this idea of wealth gains and transfer of wealth. And the reason why this is important is because I'm going to show you later on in the presentation just a massive amount of working age individuals working part-time jobs. We believe part of the reason why we have a lot of individuals working part-time jobs is because of this idea of transfer of wealth. And it all starts because that baby boomer generation did generate a pretty healthy household wealth. And so you can see here from 55 to 75, there were only a $9,000 increase in household income. Well, that nearly increased 5 times from 75 to 95. And I'm going to show you where it's at now later in the presentation. But this idea of transfer of wealth is over the course of the baby boomers' prime workforce age working years, the average boomer household accumulated $1.2 million in wealth, which translates to what we believe by 2030, a transfer of wealth of $68 trillion that will end up moving from that household to their kin. And so what that happens is, on average, the boomer household had 2 kids. As that wealth transfers, that could delay a individual for working full time. Maybe they travel, or they can afford to be in one household income. By 2002, that's the beginning of when baby boomers started to retire. On average, we see about 2 million baby boomers retire each year. However, during COVID, that increased quite significantly. We believe we're at the peak of that retirement, but we're still seeing on average about 10,000 retirements a day in today's economy from this specific generation. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody here, but before COVID hit, we were already at record low employment. So in addition to all these retirees that were happening, we did not have the people to fill the roles that were currently available. Some would say under 4% is pretty much full employment, employers were struggling to meet that production needs because they couldn't find that talent. Some of the reasons for that is because we believe as boomers were leaving, there were only about 2 people for every job, and one of them couldn't work for whatever reason. What you're seeing here is we had 7 million job openings before COVID. 5.9 million people were unemployed. Another 6 million were not working. For whatever reasons, maybe they decide to stay home, be a caretaker, but there were 6 million people not working. So we already did not have the people to fill the open jobs that were available in the United States at that point. So less people to fill jobs mean record job openings. Again, you can see that at 7 million, we were already experiencing record job openings in January of 2020. And in addition, we were also measuring the quit rates among individuals. And I'm going to jump into this a little bit further to expand on that quit rates. I know we are hearing a lot about the great resignation that's happening right now in today's economy. But what we're seeing here is this was a trend that was already occurring now, and it was by choice. And so something just to keep in mind is individuals were quitting jobs, some returning to another job, some deciding to stay out of the workforce. So you had record jobs and an increased quit rate. Fewer people on the sideline, specifically looking at boomers 55 plus. This was already occurring before COVID, where the labor force participation rate among individuals over the age of 55 was already trending down quite significantly. That has also gotten worse, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. By 2016, millennials became the largest generation in the labor force, surpassing quite significantly both baby boomers and Gen Xers. The reason why we look at this from a generational shift is because every generation has kind of its characteristics, its makeup. As I shared some of the characteristics of the baby boomer generation, millennials come with a very different characteristics and ideas of what work means to them. And so one of the things that we knew as millennials were entering the workforce is that labor force participation rate continuously dropped as millennials were entering that workforce. And again, millennials, there was a pretty large demographic group of millennials. So it's not as if there's way more boomers retiring as millennials were coming in. It was just looking at the fact that for whatever reason, millennials, the labor force participation rate among that generation was just continuously trending downward. You can see on this specific graph how it was trending downward, and then there was a deep dive in March of 2020. So as we look at that working age, that prime age working, as it continuously went down, the male labor force participation rate between 1990 and January of 2020 was down 5%. Now, when you think about 5%, you may go, well, that's not too bad, right? Well, 1 in 20 people being absent from the workforce is quite significantly when you start looking at the overall numbers. Now, thankfully, at that same time time period, the female labor force participation rate was also increasing by 3%. So there was a small gap, but at least the gap was able to close just a bit up until what has occurred in today's economy. Another thing, as I was mentioning to you earlier, and part of that transfer of wealth phenomenon that we are seeing happen in today's economy, is this reason of people working part-time jobs by choice versus economic reasons. In 2008, during the Great Recession, we lost nearly 4 million jobs just in manufacturing and construction, causing many individuals to go into part-time work. What's fascinating about that is those jobs have come back, yet those individuals opted to stay working part-time. So while it was forced by economic reasons, the choice to stay part-time continuously increases. You can see this difference here, how it was trending upward already by choice to work part-time. This is the amount of individuals that are working part-time by choice versus for economic reasons. The only outlier here is, again, March of 2020, where that shifted a bit, where a lot of people went into part-time work because of economic reasons and not necessarily by choice. But as the economy has rebounded a bit, that gap is widening again, where people are opting to be part-time by choice again. And lastly, one of the things when we talk about pre-COVID that we look at is just some of the changes from an industry standpoint. What you're seeing here is some of our data where we're looking at various industries and where individuals are moving. What I want to point out here in this data is looking at manufacturing, specifically industrial workers. You can see it there at 7.8% of individuals moving to retail trade. And so about 20% of individuals moving from manufacturing to retail trade. That's quite significant. If you are a business owner working in and you run a manufacturing unit and your talent's leaving you, it would be fascinating from a qualitative study standpoint to understand why individuals are opting to leave manufacturing specifically for retail trade. So with that said, that is the sum of the data that I wanted to share with you today when it comes to what was occurring pre-COVID. Now you take all that data and what was already occurring, and then you put a pandemic on top of it. And that's why we call this a actual labor crisis, a perfect storm of what is happening right now in the labor market. I'm going to jump into this data and hopefully it will help answer some questions of the headlines that we see each and every day. First, I want to start off with labor force participation rate because that is one of the hottest topics that we see each and every day. What's fascinating here is in March of 2020, we see that this huge dip in labor force participation rate. Now, a lot of those jobs have rebounded, actually, and I'll show you that data in just a few minutes. In addition, we're at a record number of job openings right now, yet the labor force participation rate has not changed in a year. You can see here, it's pretty flattened out for the most part, just about 61.5%. And so this is significant because as people are wondering, where are the people? They're not working. And what are some of those reasons why they are not working? As I mentioned, very few people are returning back to work. You can see on the left-hand side, this is the unemployment rate as it continues to trend downward, but yet the labor force participation rate is not matching that unemployment rate. People are opting to stay out of work for whatever reason. As I mentioned, pre-COVID, 7 million job openings, which was a record at that point, obviously plummeted a bit in March of 2020. Today, we are now at 10.9 million job openings as of just last week when the latest stats came out. And so we have, again, record job openings and individuals that are not able to fill those jobs. So why are we not recovering faster when it comes to individuals returning back to work? What I want to jump into now is 7 contributing factors to what is causing today's current labor crisis. We're going to talk a little bit about misalignment, the low immigration, temporary shutdowns, that accumulated wealth that I touched on a few minutes ago, retirements, opioids, and self-employment. So I want to start here. I don't know if anybody on this call is from higher ed, but certainly we do appreciate higher education partners. I do want to take the positioning that at MZ Burning Glass, we believe heavily in higher education and our educational partners. And we believe that while we fully believe in a skills-based economy, we believe those skills that are needed by employers should be taught in the classroom as well. And that's in a variety of ways through certifications and degrees. The United States is already highly educated. We have more educated people that are in the United States than anywhere else. Specifically, when we start to look at these numbers, individuals with college education, we have a higher labor force participation rate. You can see the numbers here, 44.3 million without a college education, and you're at about 45 to 55% participation rate versus those with associates and bachelor's degrees, 97 million with a college education. This is significant because when we start to look at those open jobs, as I mentioned, we have 10.9 million open jobs in America. 6.5 million of those jobs do not require a college degree today. 4.4 do. Now, when we look over at those that are currently on unemployment, 2.7 million of them have no college education. 3.1 million do have a college education. There's 2 key factors I want to share in this misalignment that's occurring. If ever in a perfect world, those 3.1 million college educated unemployed individuals would match the 4.4 million job openings currently available. That's not occurring in today's economy right now. So there's already a misalignment for whatever reason that's already occurring. The other part of that is to fill those 6.5 million jobs that don't require a college degree. Where are those people going to come from? Are they going to come from both those that are unemployed without a college education, and or are they going to come from individuals with a college education that are going to have to move into those roles? Are they willing to do that? Are they willing to take the pay for that? I'm asking these questions because it's an important topic to be discussing when it comes to talent recruitment. Now, the question is, where does that talent come from? Does it come from high school students? Could it come from immigration? Interestingly enough, most high school students today are already employed. There are only 600,000 unemployed high school students in America today. In addition, we have 40% of people 18 to 24 are enrolled into college at this moment. When you look at immigration, and I'm going to talk about this a couple of times, but in a short-term solution standpoint, immigration has always been a great way of meeting our labor demand when it comes to that short-term filling those jobs. So what you're looking at here are immigrants getting visas issued, new arrivals of legal permanent residents from abroad. So when you see here over the last 5 years, we were already trending downward, but 2020 took a massive hit. And so we can't rely on immigration to fill those roles. Now, as things open back up and immigration gets worked out, I'm not here to talk about policy, but as immigration starts to get worked out to some degree, that is a great short-term solution. However, it will not be a long-term solution, and I will show you some data on that a little bit later. In March of 2020, we lost 21 million private jobs. 80% of those were temporarily furloughed. We've gained 76% of those jobs. Now, you may be asking, well, we have record job openings. Well, the way that this is calculated is looking at the jobs specifically that we lost, those key jobs, occupations that we lost, and then regaining those very specific jobs. So in certain industries, we never actually recouped some of those jobs. I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, I was on a Delta flight, and I just happened to be sitting next to one of the stewardess during takeoff. And he had told me that they still had thousands that were on furlough at Delta and that they were just coming back. So it's an example of jobs that haven't been fully come back, while other industries, not only did those jobs come back, but they added a lot of new jobs. And so that's where that record job openings comes up. But we're still looking for the 5 million that were lost from before COVID. I know that often we talk about the pandemic relief ending, and if that's going to be a factor. The data doesn't necessarily point to that right now in terms of it being a factor for those coming back to work. I will say that even though a lot of the pandemic relief benefits ended on September 6th, we still issued 8.9 million checks in the month of September. So there's still a significant amount of individuals receiving some sort of form of benefits while they are not working. So will we see those people, those specific people, as well as others, return back to work? We talked a lot about the baby boomers, what was happening pre-COVID. You can see here over the last decade, we averaged about 2 million baby boomers retiring every year. During 2020, we had 3.2 million baby boomers retire. This is significant because not only is this alarming, obviously at a dangerous speed, but NPR had estimated that we were only expect to have about 2 million retire in 2020. That additional 1.2 million people falling out of the labor force and deciding not to return is having a significant impact on our ability to recruit and meet that job demand. What's fascinating here is when we look at that labor force participation rate again, in March of 2020, you see the big, huge dip that occurred, which rebounded pretty quickly right after that. Today, we are at the lowest that it's been since just before the pandemic. So individuals went back to work and then they dropped back out for whatever reason. And so we're not recovering those specific individuals back in today's labor force. One of the key contributing factors we believe that is also affecting today's economy and labor force is the drug overdose epidemic that is occurring in America. We had record numbers in 2020. Unfortunately, those numbers are pretty much level for 2021, which is just highly disappointing. We estimate about 800,000 prime age men are out of the labor force today because of opioids. I share this more from, as an employer that's leading people to keep in mind that while they are working, maybe they worked in 2020, maybe they were furloughed and they came back, but a lot happened to individuals' mental health and struggles over the course of 2020. If you're an employer, my recommendation here is just to recognize the challenges that individuals face every day in their personal and professional lives, and hopefully provide some of those benefits that can lend to positive mental health awareness, so that drugs do not become a fallback for individuals. We don't want to lose great workers just because they're not getting the resources they need. And that's not all on the employers. That's a community. That's a wide net. But I do know that there are great employers that are out there that are addressing this need each and every day. I know when we talk about the CARES Act, often, especially in 2020, we talk about the CARES Act from the idea that those stimulus payments are going to help people stay afloat. And certainly it did to some degree. However, within the CARES Act, there was so much other policy that was really affecting how individuals and families were thinking about their financial picture. For those that had tax deferrals and loan forgiveness, deferring their house payments and their rent payments, there was just so much that went into an individual's decisions last year to say, you know what, I can remain out of the workforce, maybe as a caretaker or for whatever other reason. And so it's something to keep in mind, because this had huge implications to what we're experiencing today when it comes to lower labor force participation. In addition, while those payments did help individuals stay afloat, for others, they didn't lose their job. They continuously worked, they worked from home. And so those payments actually helped them to pay off debt, increase their savings accounts. There has been numerous articles from banks talking about how they were struggling a bit because people were paying off all their debt, which they make money from interest, which was a fascinating twist, in addition to savings accounts just increasing. You can see here that median household income increased by nearly double from what it was in 1995. And so, and it really skyrocketed. It was already on an upward trajectory since 2018, but certainly increased quite significantly in 2020. An interesting study that was done by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, where they surveyed 9.3 million Americans out of 25 million that lost their jobs during the pandemic. You can see here on the right, what did that study really come out and tell us, which was there are people that lost their jobs in the pandemic and decided that they're not going to return back to work. We've talked a little bit about that when it comes to the baby boomer generation and the massive amount of retirees that we experience, but 13% decided, I'm just never going to return back to work. There's another 17% that is going to remain on the sidelines for whatever reason. Maybe they're, again, a caretaker, or maybe they've decided to hold off going back to work. You have another 38% that will go back to work at some point, but they're not looking for a job right now. And that's a positive. That could be a very positive thing when they're ready to look for work. There's incentives there to try to get them back into the workforce. And then there are 32% of people that are looking for a job right now. Another key, from a numbers standpoint, this is not going to have a huge effect on the overall picture of millions of workers looking for that we're looking for today to fill the labor gap, the labor force participation gap. However, it's something to keep in mind. We're seeing record numbers of individuals deciding to work for themselves. You can see that huge drop off again in March of 2020, but continuously by January of 2021, there were far more individuals deciding to work for themselves. And in a recent study that was done just 3 weeks ago, 43% of people who are planning to quit their jobs, again, the great resignation, are intending to go work for themselves. So I think from a strategy standpoint, it will be fascinating to understand why are they deciding to work for themselves, and will employers provide more flexibility, or as we like to call entrepreneurship opportunities, where people have the flexibility to perform for you, produce for you, but also still have some of the autonomy that they are seeking. So now I want to jump into, you know what's happening in the economy. We know it was happening pre-COVID in the economy. And I want to just paint a picture of what we have to expect and talk a little bit about the future labor crisis that is happening. In our study, we talk about what it looks like to be living below the 2.1 birth replacement rate. You can see here, we talked a lot about that baby boom generation that occurred right there in the late 50s and 60s and the massive amount of population that we got from that group. But since the mid 70s, the 1970s, we have not been at that 2.1 fertility rate since then. And what would this do and how it's going to affect our economy and shape our economy is going to be quite significant. What you're looking at here in 2009, we had 14 states that were above that 2.1% replacement rate. And fast forward 10 years, we now only have 2 states that are above that replacement rate. And those states are North Dakota and Utah. Last time I checked, there's not a lot of people living in those states, so it's not going to have a huge effect on the overall United States population. But this is something to consider because we certainly are going to, in 20 years from now, we're going to be looking at, and partly now, but 20 years from now, we're going to be in a scenario where we're not able to replace the current workers that are coming out of the workforce. And we're going to be leaning a lot more on AI and automation to meet that demand. 2020, we had the lowest birth rates in the history. So as we hope to maybe trend up a little bit, we're trending down. And there's a variety of reasons why individuals did not have a baby in 2020, but certainly it's something that's going to shape our future economy. You can see this by decade. You can see here since 1790 what the population growth looked like in the United States. The only outlier there is during the Great Depression and in 1930, where we had a pretty low growth rate during that period, but we are at one of the lowest peaks that we've had over a decade in our country's history. This is we're looking at the migration of individuals based on county. So the United States broken up into the counties, and what you're seeing here is how population is shrinking within those counties. You can see here specifically around the middle of the country how individuals are leaving that parts of the country, and there are communities and states that are winning what we say the war on talent. Every January we produce a study called the Talent Attraction Scorecard. It's where we look at communities that are doing really well at winning the war on talent, and what are those reasons why? What are those contributing factors on why those communities are winning? You can see in my home state of Florida, continuously doing well in talent migration, parts of Texas, and where I'm at right now in Idaho and in the Pacific Northwest, doing really well. And then there's some outlier communities across the country. But I do recommend going back and you can see where your community measures in previous years. And then in just a couple of months, we'll be producing that new Talent Attraction Scorecard, measuring up the communities and where they're at now. This is an intensifying problem. You can see here a timeline of predictions from the 1970s all the way up until the 2006, and that forecast continuously drops. So it's not something that's going away, it's only getting worse. How will this affect other areas, not just the workforce, but it's going to have other effects on the economy? What you're looking at here are individuals, our children to young adults, and we're looking at that population growth among those young people. You can see that if you are 22 years today, kind of where you fall, which is somewhere around that 4.4 million people ages 22. Today, if you're under the age of 1, you're just at about 3.7 million. So as this continues to trends downward, what effects will it have on the future labor force in about 18, 20, 22 years? In addition, it's going to have a huge effect on higher education and college enrollment, which has already been trending downward since 2011, down 11%. But what we're seeing is the first time college enrollments are projected to decline sharply in 2020. You can see the graph on the right, just how sharp that college enrollment is down. And it should taper off a bit in 2025, but that's going to be at nearly the same levels as it was in the early 2000s. And so there's going to be a lot of decisions and conversations among college execs on what does this mean for institutions, especially as there's going to be less and less young people that are being born and moving through the K-12 system and eventually college. This projection here was made essentially pre-COVID on population growth. And you can see here in a best case scenario, we will be at the lowest we've ever been come about 2060. And so again, we are sounding the alarm. It's something to consider. We're not saying you need to go out and reproduce and make babies of any sort, but what we are saying is that we have to come to terms that we are going to be living in an economy without people, and what strategies are going to be needed to meet that need. We talked about immigration being a reliable source for short-term solutions. However, what we're saying, this is not a long-term solution for the current labor crisis in the United States. The reason for that is because we're not the only ones struggling. Most developed countries are below the fertility rate as well. And where countries that traditionally we had immigrants come in that would be able to help out quite a bit, countries like Mexico, they are also trending downward and could be below that fertility rate in the coming years. And so this is going to be a world need and phenomenon that we can't rely on as a country, as all countries are going to be looking to their people as something that is essential and incentivizing them to stay. So what can you do? I'm going to jump into just a few solutions, some things that you already know and you've heard, and then from there we can jump into any questions or conversations that you guys all have some thoughts on. The first thing is I want to just talk about this idea of a new paradigm, and this really comes in the hiring process. For so much of the time, we have been focused on how do we filter candidates down to the very narrow part of the best candidate. Take 100 candidates, and it's our goal to get to the best 3, 5, and interview them for a job. That paradigm shift has got to flip. That funnel has to flip upside down. Our goal now is to get as many people to that interviewing process. I know that feels cumbersome and also feels overwhelming in the sense that it takes time to go through interviews, but we have to understand that perfect doesn't exist anymore, and that you're not going to find somebody with 90% of the skills. That's a unicorn in the world. And so how do we start to look at potential as talent? And if someone comes in at 40 or 50% of the skills, then how do we upscale them and move them through the career pathways within your organization? Here's what we can do in the short term. These are some of our recommendations. Obviously, raising wages is important. I will share with you, we are a data company, so we work with employers all the time. And one of the things that is not uncommon is, I'll give you a prime example. We have a report that is commonly used by employers where, let's say that you are a manufacturer and you're going to hire fabricators, and you want to hire them at $13 an hour, and you're looking for talent in your local community. We have a report that will tell us, well, at $13 an hour, looking at fabricators, you may only have access to 5% of the talent with those skills within your community. Now, if you increase that to $15 an hour, that may be, you may have access to 25% of that talent. So it's just one example of how data is being used to measure wages within a community and the importance of that. Offering non-wage incentives and through benefits is key, which I know you guys know that. Go where the potential workers are. I'm going to share a study that was done in just a minute on untraditional workers that might be available, but the days of them necessarily coming to you might be more rare and rare as you're looking for talent. And so therefore it does require a recruiting strategy outside the norm. Keep your people. It's hard enough to find people. Losing people is even harder. So come up with great retention strategies. And then the last thing is the importance of onboarding and training quickly. And I can't beat the drum any harder on this. We have employers, and specifically if you are from the higher education world as well, that will take months to hire someone and onboard them. It's just too long. And I have always been under the philosophy of hire slow, fire fast. However, there's a perfect medium somewhere in there, an equilibrium that we have to meet where if you hire too slow, you're going to lose out on that opportunity. Onboarding, train them, go through good training, and hopefully that will lead to keeping that talent. In the long term, workforce can no longer rely just solely on the HR manager or HR director. This is an executive level conversation. It's something that needs to be part of a strategic plan that you guys need to work together on developing and monitoring on a weekly or monthly basis. A report going to the executive is just not enough today. And so being part of those conversations are essential. Identify your best workers very quickly and help develop a career path for them. I'll use an example on this really quickly. I have been at MZ now for 1 year next week. And even in the first year, my boss came to me and said, now that you've been here, what things do you like that we do? What things are you interested potentially in doing at some point? I'm really happy doing the work I'm doing right now, but it was really encouraging to know, like, well, there's other parts that I could consider in the future. Those conversations are more and more important, especially as you're talking with the talent that you certainly want to keep. Reinvesting in industrial engineering. How can you combine jobs? I'm not telling you that you need to make a person do 2 jobs versus 1, but what I am saying is there may be wasteful steps out there. There may be roles that are not needed and therefore could be automated to some degree, and that could alleviate some of the challenges in the hiring process. Lastly, build great partnerships with your workforce development boards, but also with prisons and colleges, high schools, trade schools, and really start to develop a pipeline of talent. I share that because there was a great study that was put in the Harvard Business School called Hidden Workers, Untapped Talent. Highly recommend taking a look at this study, specifically looking at ways of, 1, helping in the hiring process. 1, that job application process has got to be quicker, has got to be easier. There's nothing more frustrating for a candidate to apply for 20 jobs and not hear from any of them. In fact, I saw one employer that did a really good job on this. They actually had an applicant tracking system that updated you every time it moved through the process. So not just that someone opened it and you went to an interview, but like when that individual actually got the resume and looked at it, you would get a notification. So-and-so, the HR manager, Greg, looked at this application or resume at that time. This is really good, and I think it's going to be essential. Another part of that is do not let your HRIS system screen out applicants based on some pre-criteria that was developed either by the system or by you yourself. Keep job descriptions short. Look at different ways of measuring that performance. So putting in there the specific soft and hard skills that you need and try to match candidates in that way. Part of that study looked at a variety of hidden workers. And I think this is really important, going to where the talent is. These are just some of the categorizations of individuals that you should start to look at as hidden workers. I specifically want to point, there's opportunities in all these areas, but I do want to touch on the people with spotty employment very quickly, and that is there are so many individuals that are going to have spotty employment. Maybe they worked for themselves for a period of time, they drove Uber, they were out of the labor market for whatever reason. And I would highly encourage you to overlook that, and maybe that comes up in an interview process as a discussion point, but certainly should not be weeded out in the application process. So with that said, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have or any thoughts that you are thinking about right now.
Thank you, Chris. Very good presentation. Right now, we don't have any questions, well, except for someone asked if they could get a copy of your slides.
Yeah, so I will send this specific slide deck out. All we ask is you don't share it publicly, but certainly share it internally with your teams to drive some of the conversation happening within your organizations.
Thank you. Checking to see if there are any other questions. If anyone has a question, please enter it into the questions feature on your control panel. Let's see.
I answered all the questions today.
Not seeing any others.
Okay. Thanks, Deanna, for checking on the questions, and Thank you, Dr. Laney, for the presentation today. It was some great data that was provided, not only through the presentation, but as you were speaking about it as well. It was some really interesting data. I was getting messages via cell phone and email on some interesting slides. So there's some interested staff that are waiting to get a hold of the PowerPoint or the presentation to review as well internally on how we can plan. So I really appreciate your time and the data that you provided today.
It's our pleasure. And as I send out the slides, if anybody has follow-up questions or comments, they're happy to email me. Hopefully I'll have the answer. If I don't, then someone even smarter on our team that will definitely have the answer, and we'll get it back to you.
Great.
Okay. Dr. Laney, there were a few questions that came up. Brian, do we have some extra time?
Yeah, let's try to get a couple questions if that's okay with you, Dr. Laney.
Yeah, that's fine. Happy to do that.
Great. Yep.
All right. One of the questions that came in is, automating is great, but if there is a lack of craft workers, how do you combat that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that this is one of those areas where we still have to promote the importance of some of those skilled jobs and opportunities. Automation is not going to fix everything, that's for sure. But if your job does not require, if your job requires a lot of processing and very little creative thinking, your job is most likely going to be automated. And honestly, it probably needs to be, because we need to take those individuals that are in those jobs and upskill them into jobs that do require more creative thinking. So while I don't have the answer of how do we combat craft workers, other than we do need to find more workers, and I think that starts at the younger ages. I'm sure that we hear that all the time, but we have to encourage young people the great opportunities that exist in some of those fields. And then for those jobs that don't require that creativeness, then those are the ones that are going to need to be automated.
Great, thank you. Someone else asked if you could share the link for the hidden workers study.
Yeah, I actually have it. Do you want me, when I send the presentation, it's going to be in that presentation. If you send it out to everybody, it's going to be there, but you can see it below. It's just hard for you to, I don't know if I can copy that or put that in the chat box.
And people will, just wanted to remind everybody, within 24 hours, you will receive a recording of this presentation in addition to the slides that Dr. Laney will send out. So the link will be in there, as well as maybe if you could take a screenshot right now, that would be another way to do that.
In the chat as well. It should have went out to everybody.
Great, thank you. Another question came in. Do you think our family culture has changed in relation to work habits?
Yeah, I think that we put this a little bit in the study itself, where we try to touch into a little bit of just some of the characteristics of how families change, and some of the ways. I'll use one example. In the study, we talk about individuals that have a background of faith, and that's all different kinds of faith. But if you have a background of some sort of faith, then traditionally you have more kids. I mean, that's just kind of one of the data points that we just know is out there. And so that's a cultural shift as well. And that goes to the fact that we do have less individuals that are married today. And so just you have less kids in general. And so that could lead to having the lesser fertility rates. We also point to, this is I will share with you that this is Chris's opinion, so I don't necessarily agree with it, but the essence of the lower labor force participation rate among males. We put in the study a correlation to individuals that play video games have increased as well, and there's a lot of young men that play video games. That requires a lot more data and studying. We just point that as a potential component of maybe one of the reasons, but I don't play video games, so I'm not protecting the men that play video games, but that is one of the things that we point to. So I think there's been a lot of kind of cultural shifts in general, and the way that families work and operate. There's also the sense that, from a potentially positive standpoint, is the fact that part of the wealth that was generated was the move to two-income households. And one of the things that I think the pandemic played a role in is that more families recognized that they could probably live with less and went back to that one household income and saw the benefits and the value of maybe an individual staying at home, whether it was, whoever it was. And so it went back to that one household income. That certainly was the case in even in my own family, qualitatively. So I think that there's some of those aspects as well that is going to play out in the economy in the future.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that we have received so far.
Great. Well, I want to thank Dr. Laney again for his time today. Again, some great data was shared. We certainly appreciate your time, and I want to thank everybody for joining the call today. I hope everybody has a great day, and thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.